What a relic. The words sliced through the soft cafe hum like a snapped flagpole in high wind. Travis Reddick stood near the glass pastry case, chest puffed, camera phone angled perfectly toward his smirking face. His voice was loud, not careless, but deliberate, the kind that needed to be heard. He pointed a thick, tanned finger toward the corner table. Seriously, look at that guy. Looks like he came out of a time capsule. A few heads turned. Some giggled behind their cups. One barista froze mid-swipe at the counter. There sat Franklin Delaney, small-framed, shoulders slightly stooped, but straightened now, as though a wire ran down his spine. His hands were still, one resting over the other. In front of him sat a steaming cup of black coffee and an unfolded newspaper. The photo on its page was black and white, a battleship circled in red ink. Beneath it, a single word, today. Frank didn't respond. He didn't blink. He simply reached into his pocket and placed a brass pin beside the cup, the number on it barely legible from years of thumb-worn polish. Travis chuckled again, still filming. Man's sitting here like he's guarding the Alamo or something. Then the door opened. 6 men entered. They moved with quiet intent, no chatter, no confusion. Broad shoulders, straight backs, sleeves rolled just high enough to reveal anchors inked in blue and black. One of them looked at Frank, just looked, then nodded once, so subtly it could have been missed. But it wasn't. The air in the cafe changed, not with noise, but with absence of it. Travis lowered the camera slightly. The youngest SEAL's eyes narrowed. Frank didn't look up. He just lifted his coffee and took a sip, calm, steady, undisturbed. Because this moment wasn't new. It was simply late. The morning began in quiet shadows. Outside the window of a modest apartment complex, the sky was still gray with the weight of an hour not yet ready to stretch. Inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon polish. Franklin Delaney stood before a mirror, not to admire, but to ensure everything was as it should be. He pressed 2 fingers down the side seam of his dark navy sweater, smoothing it with a care that felt almost ceremonial. The faded patch stitched into the fabric's right shoulder caught the light briefly, a ghost of old gold and navy blue. His hands, though marked by time, moved with the precision of someone who once counted seconds under shell fire. On the small table by the window sat a folded newspaper, already read, already remembered, and beside it, a single brass pin polished until it gleamed like a beacon. It bore his unit's number, barely visible beneath the wear. Alongside it rested a pocket-sized photograph. 3 men in uniform, shoulder to shoulder, smiling against the backdrop of a ship whose name was inked in the corner. United States ship Samuel B. Roberts. Frank looked at the photo for a long time, eyes lingering not on the ship, but on the man in the middle. He touched the edge of the frame gently, as if to stir memory. "Happy anniversary, Mike," he murmured. He made his coffee slowly, pouring it into a worn thermos he didn't plan to take with him. On the counter beside the stove, a pair of reading glasses waited atop a yellowed letter, its edges curled, its writing in faded blue ink. Every year on this day, he read that letter, but not before the visit. As he walked down the hallway, the sound of a neighbor's television filtered through the walls, some talk show with canned applause. No one emerged as he passed. The elevator was out again, so he descended the stairs one careful step at a time, the handrail cool beneath his fingers. At the street level, the morning had grown louder. Cars hissed past on wet pavement. Someone honked 2 blocks down. A cyclist raced by without looking. Franklin adjusted the collar of his coat and began walking east, past brick storefronts and sleeping trees. No one looked at him. Outside a grocery store, a man in a suit nearly knocked him with his briefcase. Franklin stepped aside without complaint. When he reached the bus stop, a teenager looked at his sweater, smirked, and turned back to her music. He boarded without a word. The driver didn't ask for a fare, not out of kindness, but forgetfulness. He arrived early, always 15 minutes early. That was the rule in his day. If you're on time, you're already late. He stood across the street from the cafe, reading the names on the chalkboard menu. Not for the coffee, he drank it black, no matter what they offered, but for the rhythm of the names themselves. Salted caramel, cold brew nitro, lavender oat latte. He smiled faintly. "We called it Joe," he said softly. Inside, the baristas were already moving like dancers in a crowded kitchen. Travis was there too. Franklin recognized him from before, always talking to his phone, always louder than the room needed. Today he had a tripod set up and was flexing one arm while explaining the 4 key hormones of fat burn. Frank waited another moment, then stepped forward. The bell above the door chimed softly. No one looked. He moved toward the back, the same seat he took every year. It faced the window. From there, he could see the spot where his friend once said, "If we ever get home, Frankie, we sit there every November 18th. Deal?" Frank had nodded then. He still nodded now. He ordered a coffee. The young woman behind the counter asked his name twice, spelled it wrong on the cup. He said nothing. He took his seat, laid out the newspaper, circled ship, faded photo, today. He placed the brass pin on the table, tapped it once with his index finger. The cafe's music drifted. Someone laughed near the counter. Travis raised his voice, preaching again about efficiency, power, evolution. Frank just sipped the coffee. Then he heard it. Relic. The insult didn't sting. Not because it wasn't cruel, but because he had heard far worse. Because bullets were once louder. Because men far younger than Travis had once died calling him sir. Because Franklin Delaney had walked through fire for the freedom that allowed even this kind of ignorance. And because he had kept a promise for 79 years. And now, someone else was keeping theirs. The coffee had gone lukewarm by the time Franklin looked down again. The name on the cup, Frederick, was still wet with ink. He didn't correct it. Names were like ships, misread in passing, remembered by few, but never lost to those who'd served aboard. The hum of the cafe wrapped itself around him, the soft hiss of the milk steamer, the muted bass from overhead speakers, the clink of cutlery against ceramic. But Franklin heard something else, something quieter, a voice from long ago, a promise whispered under the noise of gunfire. He unfolded a small envelope from his coat pocket. Inside was a note. The ink had faded to gray, but the words still lived. "You keep the date, Frankie. If I don't make it, you sit down every November 18th. Just sit. That's enough." He'd kept that promise through years in cities, through storms and moves and the slow silence of old age. Every November 18th, Franklin found a seat. Not for attention, not for ceremony, just to sit, to remember. Across the room, Travis adjusted his phone again. His voice rose, almost performative. "The past? It's just dead weight, man. You want strength? You cut the baggage." Someone chuckled from another table. Frank looked up, his face calm, unreadable. He folded the note and slid it beneath the edge of the plate, placing the brass pin on top. The door opened behind him. A gust of cold air swept in. Wind tugged at his collar. No one noticed. Not yet. Outside, 6 men stood just beyond the glass, exchanging quiet nods. Inside, the barista glanced at Franklin's table. Her eyes lingered, then flicked toward the entrance. A shadow crossed her face. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. Travis kept talking. "You know what's holding this country back? Nostalgia. Old men trying to write history in real time." Frank didn't respond. He didn't look up. Instead, he gently unfolded a photo, black and white, grainy from age. 3 men, youthful, grinning. One bore a toothpick between his lips. Another held a radio pack. The last, his arms draped around both, eyes squinting at the sun. All aboard a ship with a name now spoken only in folded prayers. Samuel B. Roberts. Frank brushed his thumb across the center man's face. "Mike," he said softly. Travis snorted. "Look at that guy, like he's got secrets worth keeping." The cafe's laughter was thinner this time. Uneasy, Frank placed the photo face down. A moment passed. The bell above the door rang again. this time louder. Boots, not shoes. 6 men entered, not with force, but with gravity. Quiet men, each with eyes sharpened by years most would not understand. They didn't scan the room. They didn't need to. They moved toward Franklin's table like stars aligning. The man at the front, tall, lean, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal inked letters and a trident, stopped beside the old veteran. He said nothing. Frank looked up. Recognition bloomed between them, not of faces, but of bearing, of silence shared by those who had heard too much to speak quickly. The Navy SEAL reached down, lifted the brass pin, and rolled it once between his fingers. Then, as if remembering something sacred, he stood at full attention and saluted. The others followed, each in their own time, hands to brow, eyes locked on Franklin. The cafe fell quiet. Travis turned, confused, defensive. "What?" "I was joking, man." The lead SEAL didn't blink. "No," he said. "You weren't." Franklin said nothing, but the memory behind his eyes spoke volumes. The room stayed hushed, but not still. Travis shifted uneasily, the bravado slipping like condensation off a cold glass. His phone trembled slightly in his grip, the lens still facing outward, recording. Or maybe it wasn't. No one could tell anymore. The screen had dimmed. One of the Navy SEALs took a step closer. Not threatening, just present. His arms hung loose at his sides. His gaze didn't move. Travis opened his mouth again, trying for humor, for recovery. Okay. I mean, he's a vet, right? I respect that. My granddad was in the military too." The words hung there, cheap and poorly stitched. No one replied. Behind the counter, the barista, a young woman with braided hair and a name tag that read Claire, looked at Frank's table, then slowly at the men standing beside him. Her hands paused mid-wipe on the espresso machine. She set the towel down. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Her silence said enough. Frank didn't move. His hands remained folded on the table. In front of him, the newspaper fluttered slightly, caught in the soft breath of the overhead vent. The picture of the ship, United States ship Samuel B. Roberts, seemed to shift under the light, its outline sharp against the grain of time. He glanced once at Travis, not with malice, just long. Then he turned back to the pin, still in the SEAL's hand. Gently, almost reverently, the SEAL placed it back down. One of the others leaned closer and whispered something only Frank could hear. Whatever it was, the old man gave the faintest nod, a blink slower than usual. Maybe a thank you, maybe a name remembered. The cafe's rhythm had changed. Where there had been laughter, there was now hush. Where there was noise, now breath. Travis lowered his phone completely. The screen dimmed to black. He tapped it once, then again, as if seeking a script. He found none. There was no caption witty enough for this moment. No edit that would scrub the shame. Frank lifted the photo again. This time, he held it with both hands. He stared down at the grinning face in the middle, the young man with the toothpick, forever frozen in time. A whisper escaped him. 79 years, Mike. He pressed the photo against his chest. One of the SEALs stepped forward. He placed something wrapped in blue cloth on the table, then stepped back into line. The cloth unfurled slightly, just enough to reveal a folded flag edge. Travis cleared his throat. It was dry, awkward. "I didn't mean to offend. Seriously. I didn't know he..." The SEAL leader turned, cutting him off with a look. Not cruel, just final. "You didn't care to know." Frank, still seated, spoke for the first time in minutes. His voice was quiet, like the first sound of dawn. "We didn't fight for thanks, but we remembered each other. That's all." Claire wiped her hands on her apron and moved from behind the counter. She walked over, hesitated, then placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of Frank, this time without asking. She nodded once, her lips tight. "I'm sorry, sir." Frank looked up, gave her the smallest smile. "You're not the one who owes me that." Travis shifted again, but said nothing. At the front of the cafe, a mother gently pulled her child away from the pastry case, and whispered something in his ear. The boy looked over at the men, then at Frank, then back to his mother. He stood a little straighter. It was the sound of a chair pulling back, slowly, respectfully, that shifted the current. One of the Navy SEALs stepped forward and stood beside Frank's table, head lowered. In his hand, he held the brass pin Frank had placed earlier. He turned it once between his fingers, thumb brushing over the time-worn engraving. Then, without a word, he brought his hand up to his brow in a sharp, deliberate salute. The motion wasn't for the camera. There were no cameras. It was for the man, for the moment, for the ship. Another followed, then another. All 6 men formed a half circle around Frank. None spoke. Their posture spoke enough. Across the cafe, a young man in a suit rose slowly from his table, coffee forgotten. He watched, wide-eyed, something fragile and uncertain in his expression. His father had once told him about Navy tradition. You don't break rank when it comes to respect. He felt it now, in his chest, heavy as an anchor. Travis opened his mouth, but the room wasn't his anymore. He stammered. I didn't. It was a joke. He didn't even say anything. The lead SEAL, the tallest of the group, a scar just beneath one eye, turned slowly. No, he said flatly. It wasn't. Travis flinched. The SEAL looked to Claire. This table, every year, same day, anything he wants. On us. Claire nodded, not needing to ask. Already done. Frank's voice returned. It had a warmth this time, like a memory wrapped in cloth. I came to sit, not stir things. You kept a promise, said the SEAL leader. We're just keeping you company. A pause. Frank nodded deeply. I remember each of their voices. That morning before we hit the water, they were joking about warm coffee. Said if they made it through, they'd all meet again. Same hour, same day, year after year. His hands trembled slightly. Only I came back. The youngest SEAL, barely 30, spoke up for the first time. Then today, sir, we're standing for them. No one in the cafe moved. Even the grinders behind the bar had stopped, as if the machines too were observing. Travis backed toward the door, phone now tucked in his jacket. His face was no longer arrogant, only uncertain. The cocky swagger had drained, replaced with something he couldn't quite name. He looked once more at Frank, then the folded flag, then the photograph still held gently in the old man's lap. I didn't mean to. Frank didn't look at him. Instead, he reached toward the brass pin, ran his fingers across it once more, and laid it down with care. Then in a voice so quiet it could have been wind, he said, We're not relics, we're reminders. The second cup of coffee arrived without a word, dark, steaming, delivered by hands that had once gripped ropes on ocean wind and carried brothers through enemy fire. The same hands now placed the cup gently before Frank, as if it were more than a beverage, as if it were a medal. Beside it, the polished brass pin had been returned, its edges buffed clean by the sleeve of one of the SEALs. He'd done it quietly while standing watch, as though restoring the honor that someone tried to scuff away. Now it gleamed like a lighthouse on stormy waters. Another object followed, a small wooden case, carefully latched. It was set beside the newspaper Frank had brought, the one with the red-circled ship and the word Today. Inside the case, tucked in velvet, was a folded flag, blue, crisp, heavy with memory. Frank looked up slowly. His gaze moved across the faces of the 6 men, then across the room. He saw the woman near the window, the one who had looked away when Travis had made his comment. Her eyes now shimmered. She placed her hand over her heart. Another man, mid-50s in a mechanic's jacket, stood from his stool. No grand gesture. He just stood, chin lowered, eyes locked on the old sailor. Respect. That's all it was. And it was enough. One of the SEALs took a small black and white photo from his wallet, a creased image of his grandfather beside a ship. He walked over and set it gently on Frank's table. Then he stepped back, no words, just the image. Another link in the chain. Travis lingered near the door, half turned away. His arms were folded now, but not in defiance. He wasn't live anymore. The red light on his phone was dark. He'd turned it off. Something about the silence, something about the way the cafe had changed, had peeled the performative layers from his skin. Frank lifted the coffee with both hands, steady this time. He brought it to his lips, sipped, then set it down. He glanced at the photograph from the seal. He reached out, touched the edge of it. "Thank you," he said. The seal nodded. "We brought them with us today. They're still standing, sir. In us." Frank placed his hand over the brass pin one last time. He didn't take it back. He left it there, a gift to the table, a sign that this ground was sacred now, held in memory. From the speakers above, the music had stopped. No playlist resumed. The hum of machines, the breath of people, the creak of chairs. That was the soundtrack now. No announcements, no applause, only reverence. Only a room that had remembered how to listen. The day did not end with a press release. There were no television cameras, no headlines splashed across morning papers. But the ripples began that very afternoon quietly, just like the way Frank had walked in. Steady, unnoticed, until he could not be ignored. By evening, the cafe's manager, a soft-spoken man named Rajiv, called an emergency meeting. His staff gathered in the back, some still shaken, some simply ashamed. The conversation was not loud, but it was urgent. They spoke not just of what had happened, but what had been allowed to happen. Rajiv stood before them, holding the polished brass pin that Frank had left behind. "This," he said softly, "means more than every 5-star review we've ever gotten." A new plaque was commissioned that night. No branding, no logos, just brushed steel and engraved lettering. Reserved each November 18th, in honor of United States ship Samuel B. Roberts, Destroyer Escort 413. It was mounted the next day, just above Frank's usual seat, with a small American flag folded neatly into a triangle, displayed in a shadow box beneath it. The pin sat in a shallow cradle, unscrewed from its backing, placed just so, like a badge returned home. Word traveled. Not virally, not through likes or shares, but through the grapevine of dignity. Veterans began stopping by the cafe throughout the week. Some quietly nodded toward the plaque. Others left challenge coins tucked behind the sugar packets. One man simply stood beside it, hand on his chest, then walked out without ordering. The owner of the cafe didn't hesitate. A printed card was placed at every table. "Veterans and active duty, your coffee is on us, always." But perhaps the most unexpected change came from Travis. 3 days after the incident, he returned, not with a phone, not with a camera crew, but alone. He walked in wearing a plain gray hoodie, no branding, no sunglasses, no posturing, just a man who had been turned inside out in front of a room full of strangers. He asked to speak with Rajiv. They sat for 10 minutes, maybe less. No one heard the words. But when Travis stood to leave, he walked straight to the plaque, removed his baseball cap, and stood there in silence. The following week, his fitness page released a video. Not a workout, not a sponsored post. It was just him, seated on a bench in the park, looking into the lens. "I was wrong," he said, "and I didn't even know how wrong until I saw what real strength looks like." He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He simply owned it. Then he disappeared from the platform for a while. Months later, someone saw him handing out care bags near a veteran's shelter. No hashtags, no selfies, just work. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was something harder, the beginning of respect earned, not claimed. And as for Frank, he never returned to the cafe expecting applause. He came back quietly, every November 18th, same time, same seat. And every time there was already a cup waiting for him, piping hot on the house placed by hands that now knew what they were serving. The apartment was modest, 2 rooms and a balcony, but every object had a place, and every place held a memory. The chair by the window still bore the faint shape of Frank's shoulders. The little wooden table beside it held only the essentials: a pair of reading glasses, a folded cloth napkin, and a photo frame, slightly tarnished at the corners. Frank moved slowly now. The effort to bend or rise showed in the quiet exhales that escaped his lips. But his hands remained steady as he placed the polished brass pin onto the table, beside a smaller frame, one that held the photo of the United States ship Samuel B. Roberts in all its battle-worn glory.
The flag the Navy SEALs had left him now sat in a glass case beneath the bookshelf. Frank had dusted it just that morning, not out of vanity, but reverence. To him, it wasn't a symbol, it was a promise kept. He sat down in the chair and leaned back slowly, his eyes moving toward the horizon through the open blinds. The sun was beginning to fall behind the skyline, casting long gold ribbons across the floor.
Light touched the photograph, the case, the pin, bathing them all in a quiet amber glow. Then, with careful intent, Frank reached for the tape recorder on the shelf. It was old, but reliable. He clicked it on. A soft crackle, then static, then a voice. Faint, weathered by time, but clear. "Delaney, you still there, brother?" Frank smiled, lips barely parting. He answered aloud, though no one could hear him but the shadows in the room. Always. He didn't cry. There was no need. His eyes, though lined with time, shimmered with the kind of peace that only belongs to men who've carried weight without complaint, who've borne witness without bitterness. Outside, the wind stirred. A flag fluttered high on a pole across the street, and far off, so faint it might have been imagined, the low thrum of helicopter blades passed in the distance. Or maybe it was just memory, circling once more before landing. Frank remained in the chair as the room grew still. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak. He simply stayed. A quiet sentinel. A relic? No. A keeper of oaths. A brother still standing. A life lived in full, never forgotten. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.